Welcome to the Right Away Writing Workshops with me, Lisa Allen Agustin. The three main elements of fiction are character, setting, and plot. Plot is the word we use for the sequence of events in a book, short story, play, or film. The events are not random, but related to each other. They are consequential. Event A leads to event B, and event B leads to event C, etc., like links in a chain. Every plot has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The protagonist, the main character who the story is about, in the beginning starts off in one condition with a goal. In the middle comes the conflict. He faces obstacles that keep him from his goal, which may cause his condition to begin to change. In the end, he either overcomes the obstacles or is overcome himself, often with his condition changed. The beginning introduces the reader to the characters and the setting, the time and place where the story takes place. In this part of the work, you sow the seeds of the major plot conflict. Some call this the inciting incident or the call to adventure. Here too, the protagonist might face lesser conflicts that mirror or parallel the major conflict. At this point, giving the character a time limit to achieve his goal gives the plot more urgency. In the beginning of Gone to Drift by Diana Macaulay, the protagonist Lloyd is worried that his grandfather, the elder fisherman, Mas Conrad, has not come home from his last fishing trip. We meet Lloyd, an impoverished young boy, his hard-working mother, his abusive father, and the socially stratified Kingston in which they live and work. The inciting incident? Lloyd decides to look for his grandfather, because if not soon found, the old man could die. Lloyd's search starts with low stakes. He asks other fishermen at the beach. When that gives no answers, he takes his search further, consulting his dreaded, violent father. Then, with the help of an adult ally, Jules, he asks the officious Coast Guard. When he still has no answers, he decides to stow away on a Coast Guard ship going to the Pedro Cays, where his grandfather had said he would be going. By the middle, the character is in major conflict, facing big obstacles. There should be doubt whether the character can meet these challenges and succeed. In this part of the plot, the protagonist is being equipped or trained to face the main conflict. Every aspect of the middle unfolds from what has already been introduced in the beginning. In the middle of Gone to Drift, Lloyd stows away to the Pedros but does not find his grandfather. He does get a clue from a madman that Mas Conrad's fate has something to do with the illegal dolphin trade. As he follows this lead, he realizes his father and other dangerous men are involved in his grandfather's disappearance. He wants to give up. His ally takes him on one last trip to search for his grandfather. At the end, the conflict is resolved. The character has either achieved his goal or failed. Often the character has changed in some way because of the conflict. Tie up your loose ends in the end. Justifiably, readers find it annoying when there's a subplot that hasn't been resolved by the end of the story. Go borrow a copy of Gone to Drift from your school library so you can see how this story ends. When you're writing, resist the impulse to bring new stuff into your plot after the introduction. Your major characters and settings should be introduced early, even if they're only mentioned. Establish the rules and possibilities of that world early on too. Your climax has to come from what you've already written. Don't write in an angel to save the protagonist if nobody has said anything about angels being real. Or suddenly have the hero pull out a magical sword from nowhere if he's never done that before. That's called using a Deus Ex Machina device, and it's a no-no. Your plot has to be logical and consistent with the rules of the world in which it's set. Understanding your plot is key to good storytelling. Breaking it down can be helpful. There are different ways to do this. One way is to draw a plot mountain. This is a diagram showing the introduction, where the reader meets the main characters and setting, and the protagonist gets the call to adventure, the first in the whole chain of events that is the plot. The rising action, where the characters and setting are developed. It might contain secondary conflicts that mirror or parallel the main conflict and trigger other conflicts. The rising action drives the action towards the main conflict. Climax, the main conflict. The falling action, the consequences of the events in the climax, and the resolution, how the whole story ends. A plot mountain is a good tool for keeping track of the timeline of the events of your plot and where they fit in its structure. You could also use a spider diagram. This diagram connects characters, plot events, and settings around the main character. A spider diagram is a good tool for playing with ideas about plot, character, and setting. In Gone to Drift, for example, the central character would be Lloyd, and around him his mother, father, grandfather, friends, the madman, and so on. There would be the settings of Kingston Harbor and the Pedro Cays, the Coast Guard ship and Lloyd's home, etc., etc. The plot events would include Lloyd's meeting Jules, the scientist who helps him, Lloyd stowing away on the Coast Guard ship, and Lloyd finding his grandfather. Gone to Drift actually has two parallel plots. As he lies suffering on a rock in the Pedros, Mas Conrad tells his own story in a first-person narrative of growing up in a fishing family, falling on hard times, and losing the love of his son, Lloyd's father. Lloyd's story is told in a third-person limited narrative voice, so the narrator can't tell the reader anything Lloyd doesn't know himself. Mas Conrad's first-person narrative provides background to Lloyd's story, explaining why Mas Conrad and his son don't get along, and why the family lives in such terrible poverty, things Lloyd doesn't know. Author Christopher Booker argues that there are 7 basic plots, and all stories are versions or inversions of these basic plots. They are overcoming the monster. In this kind of plot, the protagonist battles a monster, a monstrous character, or a monstrous situation. Shakira Bourne's novel My Fishy Stepmom has this kind of plot. The protagonist, Josephine, has to save her bewitched father from the clutches of his new girlfriend, who is more than she appears. The Harry Potter books by J.K. Rowling have an overcoming the monster plot. And so does the Caribbean YA novel The Beast of Cucuyu by Kevin Jared Hossein. The monster the protagonist overcomes can be internal or external. Not all monsters have fangs and claws. Voyage and return. Here, the protagonist goes on a journey, arrives, and returns, being changed by the experience. An example of this kind of plot is The Protector's Pledge by Danielle Y.V. McLean. JV, a young boy, enters the mysterious Oscuro forest, and what he finds there challenges his understanding of himself and the world. He leaves the forest a different boy from the one who entered it. Rags to riches. In a rags to riches plot, a protagonist from humble roots achieves fortune or fame after overcoming adversity. The classic example of this is the fairy tale The Ugly Duckling. Raised as a duckling, a cygnet, that's a baby swan, folks, suffers abandonment and ridicule before he grows into a gorgeous, powerful swan. The Unmarked Girl by Janelle Frontin has a rags to riches plot, as the protagonist Yara is at first rejected by the inhabitants of her planet, but then overcomes adversity to become the queen of her own tribe. The Quest. In the Quest plot, the protagonist takes a journey to find an elusive treasure. The plot of Gone to Drift by Diana Macaulay is a quest. Lloyd is on a quest to find his grandfather, who has been lost at sea. In The Lord of the Rings, the famous book by J.R.R. Tolkien, a hobbit named Frodo Baggins is on a quest to destroy a magical ring in a volcano in order to save the world from evil. Comedy. Comedy plots aren't necessarily ha-ha funny. A comedy plot is one that is light-hearted and has a happy ending. In a comedy, the protagonist must untangle misunderstandings that cause obstacles in order to reach his goal of harmony. Dreams Beyond the Shore by Tamika Gibson is a comedy. The protagonists Chelsea and Chiron meet and fall in love, but their relationship is threatened because their fathers seem to be on opposite sides of the law. They can only be together when they understand truly who their fathers are. Tragedy. Tragedy is the opposite to comedy. Tragedies look at pain, suffering, and sorrow. In a tragedy, the protagonist's own flaws or mistakes destroy him. Shakespeare was a master of tragedy. Macbeth, Hamlet, and King Lear are some of his best-known tragic heroes, whose flaws, ambition, self-doubt, and narcissism tear them down in the end. Rebirth. Rebirth is the last of the 7 basic plots. In a rebirth plot, the protagonist dies or lets go of some important characteristic and is reborn, either literally or figuratively. If you're familiar with the Star Wars movies, the character arc of Anakin Skywalker or Darth Vader is a rebirth story. He starts off good, gets corrupted, has a change of heart, and returns to being good again. We've talked about what a plot is and how to map your plot using a plot mountain or spider diagram. We've seen how different kinds of plots work. Now let's put that in action. Good writers rewrite. Every time I write something, I go back and reread it, editing as I go. I look for grammatical errors, but I also look for perspective errors, places where the narrative voice is saying something it shouldn't be able to know. I try to strengthen the characterization and setting and tighten the dialogue. And of course, I look for plot holes, parts that just don't make sense. Here's your plot challenge. Take any story, novel, or script you've written and run the plot checklist, editing as you go. Every plot has a beginning, middle, and end. Does your beginning introduce the characters, setting, and roots of the main conflict, contain the call to adventure or inciting incident, and set a time limit to the protagonist achieving the goal? Does your middle build the characters, setting, and conflict, raise the stakes, and equip and train the protagonist for the main conflict? Does your end contain a strong climax in which the character faces the main conflict and wins or loses? Is there a resolution in which the consequences of the climax unfold and all the loose ends are tied up? Is your plot logical according to the rules of the setting? And is the resolution of the climax consistent with the plot, or do you introduce a Deus Ex Machina device to resolve it? Happy rewriting!